Joining me now on my regular Monday afternoon political panel, Claire March, Managing Director of Council House, a former Labor advisor and former Liberal MP and now Premier State Consultant, Fiona Scott. Great to see you both. Claire, what's your read on things as we now await the Prime Minister to fire the starter's gun? It looks like he's heading to the full length of the term. He means every word of it, going through to May 21 by the looks of it.
Yeah, and you can't fault him for consistency. He did say that from day dot, but it's a bit of a sport in our profession to speculate about these things. And here we are, mid-May, and approaching mid-May, and we're ready to go. But look, in a normative sense, the gun may as well be fired because we're well and truly in the throes of an election campaign. And we heard from your package just now that tightening of that narrative, that compare and contrast, and both leaders on campaign footing. I have to say, looking at kind of the health of both of those two parties as they head into the election, you would expect, looking back on the term that the Prime Minister's had, he's been afforded an immense opportunity to spend an enormous amount on putting money into the hands of those in the electorate, whether it be through government spending programs during COVID for small business and indeed, extra cash benefits for welfare recipients, whether it's this $8.6 billion cost of living package that we've seen more recently in the budget, whether it be tax cuts. If you look back at the term of government, there's an awful lot of sweetening of the electorate here. It's, on reflection, a bit surprising that we've got a election budget now which has been fairly flat. It's been received. In your package there you had the Treasurer explaining maybe the general public just haven't had time to get across the budget details yet. I'd say that largely it's not exactly the bounce in the step that the coalition is seeking to pre-position as they head into the election campaign. Compare that with the opposition who have a very tidy position in their candidates endorsed and in line on the ground, a leader who's got a strong narrative around what he'll do in government that the coalition won't, specifically aged care, and they are not suffering any of the baggage and the age of the government that Scott Morrison has to defend now, whether it be crises and being in court with his own party, et cetera, et cetera. So just looking at that, it's a long time till polling day, but just looking at how they stand as the starter's gun is about to be fired, you'd rather be the opposition any day. They're looking very strong, and Scott Morrison has a little bit of catching up to do to get himself back.
Fiona, it seems to me there's a bit of there's enough in the poll for both sides to worry about, really. I mean, today you got a drop of 3 points in the Labor primary. They don't want to see too much more of that, if anything, and you've got the Libs on a primary vote at 36, which you're not going to win on. So a bit to worry about for both sides, Fiona.
Yeah, you're 100% right there, Kieran, and I think there's very much we've seen in politics over the last few years, probably even decades, this sort of march of the independents and the march to the middle. And look, I think the most prevalent outcome here is probably going to be a hung parliament and potentially negotiated after the election. And the challenge there sits on both sides. I mean, you go back to the package that Andrew Clennell had earlier in the program, where he actually showed election by election how much that primary vote has really fallen on both sides. And I think that just goes to this sentiment of people losing faith maybe with the major parties, feeling that the major parties aren't necessarily talking to them or communicating with them. And, maybe in some ways also switching off a little bit. The one point I probably would disagree with Claire on there in some of her commentary is that, look, over the last 3 years, the Morrison government has been given, the humdinger of terms in Parliament. I mean, having to deal with a global pandemic, a war now in Eastern Europe, various floods. We started the term with massive bushfires. And really, I mean, the fact that the coalition has come through all of that with, low unemployment rate. Yes, we did hit a recession for the 2 quarters that statistically makes that. What we need now is that firm economic management going forward. That's what the Australian public need. And I think there's a degree in the public right now that they're actually a little bit scared. Sure, unemployment is low, but are people sure about what that means for their jobs. You've seen globally that petrol prices is impacting us here now. We're seeing interest rates impacting. We've got high house
but Fiona,
prices.
you are seeing, you know, just to pick you up on that, because Labor is, you know, I get your point, but Labor has basically said they're not doing anything of what they took last time. I had Jim Chalmers on Sunday Agenda yesterday saying none of the taxes they took to last election. Haven't they sort of neutralised a fair bit of that to say, OK, they reassure people they're a safe pair of hands? Yeah,
look, you're right there, Kieran, and I do agree with that point. But overwhelmingly, when the coalition fights on economic management and national security, they win. When the Labor Party can turn the debate to health and education, they win. The fact that we're having this conversation about education and the Australian public genuinely believe that the coalition is going to be the ones that are going to manage the economy better, then that's great footing for the Prime Minister to be on. I think at the moment that Anthony Albanese is in the driving seat. I think the coalition has a lot of work to do to win this election. It's going to be a hard election. They have been there for a decade. It is an older government and there's a lot to pick apart. But, you know, at the end of the day, this is going to be a fight right up till mid-May.
Claire, how much do you think this is also an opportunity in the sense that if Labor does win according to the polls, they're heading towards a victory, how much of it would be as well tapping into the sentiment that people just want to move on from the last couple of years and everything that reminds them of this pandemic period is a nightmare for many?
Well, I think people are only just starting to tune in. My sense is that during the pandemic, the general public hung very closely to the government of the day, no matter what colour they were. Politics was taken out of government for a while, and we saw that reflected internationally and domestically as well. I think there's been a period of time where Australians have been very grateful and happy not to have to see much of their politicians for a while. And I think the Prime Minister's benefited from that period because he hasn't had a particularly good run in recent times. But I think that ends now. People start to engage and focus again. I think broadly speaking, the Australian public is fairly over the way politics is practiced in this country to date. And I think that's reflected in this tracking up of the minor party vote that we've seen basically since the internet age and internet arrived on our tablets, and we've seen the fracturing of the what used to be the major party vote into minor parties. I think where Labor has an opportunity here and where Anthony Albanese has an opportunity is to paint a picture of what Australia could be post the pandemic. And we've heard a lot about this from Shadow Treasurer Jim Chalmers. It's about inviting Australians to imagine, more than what they've received to date insofar as their government. And that involves trust, which is inherently complex because, as we know, trust is at an all-time low when it comes to how Australians feel about the political class. But that's something that's lays at the foot of all of us, and it's something that I think that Australians will find very refreshing should they experience an Albanese government come mid-May.
Fiona, just quickly, we're almost out of time, but your thoughts on that sort of broader point there from Claire about people wanting to move beyond this, the politics as usual?
Yeah, look, I think Claire's right. I think it's exactly what we're seeing in these opinion polls. I think it's a trend that we've seen for a while. I could even go back to say it's probably one of the reasons that an anti-politician politician like Donald Trump got elected in America. It is definitely a trend that's going on, and the Australian public do want to see something different. And, I think a lot of the hyperbole that we hear from all politicians, I mean, I'm not going to pick on one side or the other there. People want to see what are you going to do for me? What are you going to do in my home? How are you going to make my standard of living a lot better? And I think the unique point of this point in time in history is more than ever, Australians are wanting to see politicians they can trust and someone that's going to lead our country forward.